very... The next one I'm going to talk about is Blasphemous, and while Blasphemous technically came out last year or the year before, it's been out for a while, but the final piece of DLC didn't come out until last month, so I didn't fully play through it and finish it until just a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to talk about it anyway. Blasphemous is a 2D Metroidvania-style game with brutal violence, with some Souls-like elements, and heavy religious iconography. And it is very, very cool. Doesn't quite reach all of the highs of some of the classic Metroidvanias. The combat sometimes can come off as a little bit forced. Initially it's very compelling, but as it goes you just start learning all the quirks to all the different enemy types, and then there's not a lot to it, it's just going through the motions. Although the boss battles are generally pretty great, there are only a couple that are like pretty lackluster. It has some issues with traversal, like there's one part of the game where initially I screwed up an order of operations of doing a side quest because I didn't think I could get through an area because I couldn't quite reach the next ledge, and I thought it was like, oh, there's obviously a double jump you're going to get later, and it turns out I just needed to be pixel perfect on my jump. It is super interesting just from an artistic and storytelling point of view. It tells a very, very weird metaphysical story, but mostly through lore and side projects. The main reason that I am still talking about it today, though, is because the final DSC was released, and while there was a good ending and a bad ending before, now there is a true ending that is apparently going to lead directly into the story of Blasphemous 2, which partially for me is a little bit weird, because the true ending of the original I feel like would have been a better lead into a sequel, considering how the final game ends. It feels like it's closing off what a sequel could do, but who am I to say? Overall, though, I really enjoyed it. Literally the only downside, like I said, is the platforming, to the point where there is a series of challenge rooms that are just astronomically badly designed. Because of the way the controls are in the game, there's a specific move that's like this downward strike that sends you directly at the ground, but you also have these lamps that you need to bounce off of to keep going, but to do that you have to be pressing downward and attack, which is what causes the downward strikes. It's like 1 out of every like 6 or 7 that I did, it just sent me down into spikes, meaning that I spent hours trying to complete these challenge rooms, ultimately for a special ability that I basically never used. But overall, the game is still great. The map is well designed. The style is amazing. The gameplay is overall, like I said, it gets a little bit repetitive by the end of it, but it's still very fun. The boss battles are great. It is artistically incredible. So I do highly recommend getting into Blasphemous if you haven't played it yet, especially with a sequel on the horizon. Let's see, are there any other smaller games? No. So I think I need to start moving into the last 3 big ones. So the 3 big ones that I'll bring up that were really the bigger ones that I played. One is because it's interesting, and the other 2 because they were actually like AAA big games. The first is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. And I very much liked this game. The only problem with it being that, like I said earlier, Insomniac games right now are feeling like they are stuck a generation or 2 behind. Like, this literally just feels like an upgrade of the PS3 Tools of Destruction than it does a modern game. It's just more Ratchet and Clank. The problems with that being that the new weapons that they introduced don't really add a lot. A lot of them are just remixes on old ideas, even if they are still really fun to use. And they do a little bit to give you some more reasons to use multiple of those items, but in general, it's fine as far as gameplay goes. The story is great, but it also feels like a stopgap, because honestly the biggest thing is that Ratchet & Clank needs to now wrap up the story they've been building off of since Tools of Destruction, and it feels like they're finally going to get there with the next one. It's like, if they don't, it's like, what is wrong with you? Just end the story already. It is beautiful. It is one of the best looking games I have ever played, but just overall it just feels kind of like I've been there and done that. Even the biggest mechanic that they added was the rift thing. That was the thing that they were talking about, is, you know, you have rifts between different dimensions, which mostly are used for traversal reasons. Like the thing they said of showing up between all these different dimensions never really happens. They're either really scripted sequences, or they're literally just used for platforming. They're used as another way to traverse, like you literally just go, reach over there and bring it here, which is stupid because you already have an item that did that, so it's superfluous to use it for that purpose anyway. And then the other one is literally just as a gate to get to some of the challenge rooms, which the other thing is that the puzzle solving really never gets to the levels of the height of the series either. Like the best ones are still in Ratchet and Clank: A Crack in Time and Quest for Booty. It just felt like their total focus was on telling the story and building this bigger universe and not actually thinking about the gameplay that was going to need to go with it. It's fine. It's still a good game. It's like everything about it is, I feel like I've played it before. So if you love Ratchet and Clank, you'll probably like this one, but it's not a jump forward for the series in any kind of big way. So the next game I want to talk about, it's like, I want to do a bigger video about this one at some point, because it's going to have to be spoiler heavy to talk about it, but Inscryption, talking about deck building roguelites again. Inscryption is one of the most interesting games I've played in a while. So it's by Dan Mullins, the same guy who did Pony Island, which if you haven't played Pony Island and you can get a hold of it, it's great. He does a certain type of game that plays with meta-narratives in a really interesting way, and this game does the same. So without saying like literally anything on top of that, if you feel like watching the trailer, watch the trailer. It doesn't reveal too much, but it does give you hints of where the story is going to go. But it is an interesting little deck building game, and it's an interesting example of how to use meta storytelling on top of the gameplay itself. But you just kind of have to play it and then come back. And then, like I said, I'll do a bigger video later, but I do highly recommend it. Just know it's not going to go where you think it's going to go in any way, shape, or form. And all of that leads me to my final game, and the last game I will be talking about. I think I'm going to have to, you know, with the lesser games that I played, but it was kind of a weak year for games in general, so I'm probably still going to give this my game of the year, but it still was very good, and that is Resident Evil 8. Capcom is, for whatever reason, is like the one company outside of Sony that is really carrying the banner for single-player games right now, and Resident Evil 8 was great. I have my problems with it. Almost all of them are preferential. As a game in and of itself, it is very well put together. My main problems with it is that I wanted it to be something other than it was. Because the two games it is involved with are Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 7. It is a direct sequel to Resident Evil 7. If you played Resident Evil 7, you'll probably like this one, although it is a little bit more action-y than that one is, for a good reason. Like, there are narrative reasons for it to be more action-y than the predecessor. It also feels like Resident Evil, and it's heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4 in the sense, like I said, it's a little bit more action-y, but it also lacks some of the nuance that game had. But I'll get into that in a minute. Overall, though, Resident Evil 8 is a great example of a company trying to figure out what works best in a series and doing what it can to really deliver on that. While it doesn't do any of its individual elements as well as other entries in the series, it does do a great job of what it does, if that makes sense. So, for instance, the weapon and storage system is much more like it was in Resident Evil 4, but it's not quite as well done as it is there. The upgrade system is kind of meaningless. It really just upgrades your weapons, whereas Resident Evil 4, you really had to pick between which weapon you wanted. Each one had their advantages, whereas in this one, each type of shotgun that you get is better than the last one in every respect. I think the only major difference usually is the ammo that it can hold. And none of the weapons have the special abilities that you can earn after you've upgraded everything else. Just then you can get an infinite unlock in the bonuses. The story and enemies aren't as interesting or well done as like Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 7, but are very good for what they are. The fact that they did multiple types of storylines all within the same game were great. I wish they were a little bit more interconnected and not so much. I'm not a big fan of hub systems. Go back to one place and then go out to the various areas you need to go to. I've never been a big fan of that setup. So I was hoping for more of like you're exploring the village, but it's really a bunch of one-off areas that you go through. That being said, each of those one-off areas is really cool. The one big credit I will give Resident Evil 8 is it is the first Resident Evil game that has actually made me give a crap about the sci-fi area at the end. Almost everyone before this, the sci-fi area always feels like a letdown, but they do it at the end of every single one where it's more modern. And the other areas are also great. Whereas in this one, that's one of the creepiest areas in the game and one of the most interesting gameplay-wise. It's also interesting to see where they're going stylistically. Like the last one, Resident Evil 8, is based heavily on, or the last one, Resident Evil 7, is based on like Southern Gothic horror stuff, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So seeing where this one they went with, let's do our take on classic monsters, witches, werewolves, vampires, the creature from the Black Lagoon, etc. Seeing their interpretation of that is great, and also seeing them finally we're going to do different play styles, but put them all in the same game and make it work. Unlike how they bungled that up in Resident Evil 6, it's just the whole package is just good. It's just a very, very good game. There's nothing about it that is outright bad. Unlike a lot of the Resident Evil games have had stuff where they've done things that are good and then other things that are bad, or they're really focused. This one actually broadened out and tried to bring in as much of the series as it could, and it made it all work. Like, it was a very fun game. Very few games have grabbed me the way that has in the first few minutes. Now, granted, some of that was nostalgia, and the opening beats are really just Resident Evil 4 down to a T, but it was very fun, very good stylistically. I highly recommend that to anyone who may have fallen off of the series or is looking for a more methodical first-person shooter. It's Resident Evil 8 is definitely my game of the year. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I liked that, and I've been really enjoying all of Capcom's Resident Evil output lately. I haven't played the multiplayer stuff they've been doing, but I'm excited. I think they said that they're planning some DLC to come down the line. They weren't initially, but after how well it was received, they are going to. So hopefully we'll get to see some of that, because I will happily jump back into Resident Evil 8. I've played through it 3-4 times already, and I'll probably end up playing through it again. I need to go back and play Resident Evil 7 again too, and we've got the Resident Evil 4 HD remake, and there's plenty of Resident Evil for anybody who could possibly want it at this point. So, that being said, that is it. I am done with my 2021 wrap-up. Thank you, everybody who made it through all of this. Hopefully you got some good recommendations, or you liked hearing my opinions. Leave any comments or critiques in the comments below. I am still trying to figure out exactly what my voice is on this channel, so any help from you would be great. I've got some other reviews that I want to be doing soon. As I said, I want to really talk about Inscryption, and I really want to talk about some of the other big movies and video games that I've played, but in a little bit more depth. And I am planning to do a series of retrospectives moving forward. I'm planning to go through all of the Marvel movies. I want to go through all the DC movies, and then start going through some other classics as well. I also went through and watched a bunch of horror movies with my wife this last October, where we watched the original and the remake, and I do want to talk about that at some point. We'll see when I can actually get to it. I've got a lot of work to do before I go back to work full-time. My job is outdoors based, so part of the reason I can make these videos is because I have a lot of time off in this winter. So when I go back to work, stuff's going to slow down again, but hopefully I can keep it up more this year. Yeah, so that's kind of my plans moving forward. Thank you everyone for watching. My name is James, and I have been arguing semantics.
Like and subscribe.